Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. In this episode, we are joined by Nikki Cole, a writer, producer, and director with Moving Visions Productions. Diana and Nikki begin by discussing how the pandemic has required us to become more flexible in our work and personal lives. They continue their discussion by exploring how empathy plays an important role in all our collaborations and interactions. Lastly, they talk about how successful leaders can drive substantial results by the thoughtfulness of a small gesture. Now, let's have a conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Soft Skills Salon podcast. I am delighted to be with you today. I'm still Diana Kowarski, and we are going to be having a great conversation today because, as we say at the Soft Skills Group, conversation is the currency of communication. So today we're going to have a conversation with Nikki Cole, and she has been an established international artist of sorts, who's a writer, director, and producer. She is critically acclaimed as a choreographer and dancer. She transitioned into film, attending NYU SCE, and I'm sure the SCE stands for something that I am unaware of. That's fantastic and global and lovely. She circled the globe with her 11-year-old daughter for 3 years, creating the Vision TV PBS documentary Wanderings, A Journey to Connect, exploring unknown Jewish communities from Korea to Iceland to India. Her film Intimacies won the audience vote for Best Documentary at the Palm Springs International Film Festival. She was the series producer and director of the docudrama You, Me, and the Kids for WTN, produced films for Vancouver's Pacific Space Center, The King. Now, this word I might have a trouble with, but I'm going to try my best. The King Abdulaziz Historical Center in Saudi Arabia, and motion simulator ride films, including Mars and Sea Trek for Cymex. After a career in over 15 factual TV series, she's expanded. She went into fiction, directing The Next Step for BBC Kids, an award-winning dramatic short, My Father, Joe, for Amazon Prime. Her script for the historical fiction series Serpent Queen won Best Pilot Screenplay at the Osaka Film Festival, and her feature The Bride's Wedding won Best Screenplay at the You're going to just kill me here, aren't you, with all these names, Nikki? At the Jogja International Film Festival. There's a lot that my friend Nikki here has done. In addition to all of that and giving me some tongue twisters along the way, she's also spent 10 years filming in a remote East African village while educating girls and boys, providing solar cookers to that village. And if you are interested in that work, it can be found at the website tonembi.com, and that is spelled TON as in Nancy, EM as in Mark, B as in Bear, EE.com. Nikki Cole, hello.
Wow, that was really entertaining watching you struggle with those pronunciations.
Oh, thank you.
You did very well. You did better than I do when I'm in those places. I'm usually making an idiot of myself. I'm just trying so hard.
Not at all. And I'm delighted to try my best because there are so many accomplishments and so much that you have done, writing, directing, producing, and in the work that you've done. I tried to rack my brain, Nikki, as to when exactly we met. I want to say at least 5 years ago. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. It was at, I'm pretty sure it was a Women in Film Toronto breakfast, which is always interesting because I'm usually sort of trying to pry my eyes awake. Those are very early before the rest of the world goes to work. But certainly, for me, it was early. And you certainly woke me up. I was like, this woman is amazing. Totally amazing. I'm a huge fan of yours. And I've done a couple of Zooms with you, and you helped us also, same organization, Women in Film Toronto, you helped us become better mentors.
Right. Right. Yes.
And one thing I love about you is while you're waiting for your Zooms to start, you're actually dancing. And I'm a former dancer. So that's how I prepared for my talk with you today, was I've been dancing around the kitchen.
There you go. There you go. It's all about the movement, right? It's either the body or the mind. So that's fantastic. Yes, I'd forgotten about the mentoring training. That was great fun. That was great fun. So, Nikki, I am so appreciative of your time. If only from your bio, everyone listening knows that you're a busy person and I have lots of projects on the go. In addition to all of that, you even pre-selected some of the questions from the soft skills salon questionnaire, and there were 4 in total that resonated with you. So we're going to see about making our way through some of those questions in our conversation. The first of which is a pretty timely one, and it's item 4 on our list, and it sounds like this. How do you compare pre-COVID soft skills to moving beyond COVID soft skills at work? And if I may, Nikki, I had no idea how to turn that phrase of positivity because I couldn't comfortably say post-COVID. So moving beyond COVID was the closest I came to saying, hey, it's getting better, but I'm not 100% sure we're out of the woods yet.
No, I totally agree with you. And I did think about that too, is how do we talk about this? Because it's a constantly evolving world. And we're all mystified.
Right.
We're all, my favorite way of thinking about the world right now is that nobody knows what they're doing. It's like in every field, in every industry, because it's changing all the time. So I have learned, I think I'm in the creative industry, so I've had to learn to be flexible from the get-go. Right. Which is always an interesting challenge for anybody, but even more so now because we have to, just even right from the beginning of COVID, where we had to constantly learn to say, how are you and how is your family? At the beginning of every email and every Zoom and because so many people were struggling and suffering and losing people and having sick people. And so I thought that was actually a really good thing in terms of soft skills. I tend to be like that anyway. I'm always interested right from the time I was a kid. I remember doing art studies and they were always saying, the artist did this and the artist did that. And I was always saying, well, what about their family life? And were they parents? And who were their lovers? And I was always told that has nothing to do with their art. It's like, they're artists and we must just look at them and the art for the art's sake. And it just never quite sat right with me. Mm-hmm. Now we understand that's the quote unquote patriarchal gaze. But it just never, I was just always like that. I was just always interested in the people who who were in front of me, whether they be on Zoom, whether they be in a room.
Right.
Who are you? And I think by asking, you can always see, especially on Zoom, because we're in close-ups with each other, right? Yeah. So I'm doing the same thing I've always done, which is, how are you? And is your family okay? I hope everyone's all right. And you can see the people's faces soften. And with men, it's often a surprise, especially if they don't really know you. And you have to be careful because you can't be overly familiar with, someone who you're trying to raise funds with or from or whatever.
Yes, of course.
But I still do it because I think it's important. And I also just love to see their reactions. And right now I'm doing a co-production with a French co-producer. Uh-huh. And she ends every email with bisous, kisses. And she started doing that right away, because we connected very, very well. And I was like, she was probably like this before, but now it becomes even more important because we have to work a little harder, I think, to get through the screens that we're on. And some people are not comfortable on screens. So that's always interesting, dealing with people whose name is there, but they don't want to be on screen. Well, then you find out, I've been on Zooms with people who won't come on camera. Why? Yes. Because they're dealing with long COVID and they're seriously ill.
Mhm.
but it's so essential for them to be on that webinar or that Zoom or whatever. So now when I see that, it's a woman I'm thinking of in particular, and she's in a lot of the women's in film groups that I'm in, both in the United States and Canada. I always make a point to ask her in the chat, how are you doing? Right. And she always goes, thank you for asking, because it's so easy to forget about people who are not in front of you moving on the screen. And it's just their picture or their name or whatever. So I'm rambling here a bit, but I think what I'm trying to say is that one of the good things that I think has come out of COVID, if there's any such thing, is this empathy that we've been forced into having, if we haven't had it before. And I think it's changed people. And I hope the change is there. I mean, I hope we get past COVID, obviously, but I hope that this is something, an internal change that will stay with us. I think that's what the short answer is. I'm sure there's more.
And I appreciate that. There's so much in that answer that I've taken note of. You know, Nikki, you said nobody knows what we're doing right now. And I love that as a way of opening up a fresh set of eyes. You know, I love the idea of a beginner's perspective. I often will ask people to think about from a beginner's point of view or from a less sophisticated point of view. And I like to remind myself of that as often as I can, because I've been doing what I do for more than a beat or a minute now. And it's important to give yourself the chance to not take for granted what it is that has perhaps become habitual in some senses. And you're right, it's tough as heck because COVID has been so adverse and so remarkably complicated and difficult and life-changing and sadly life-ending for so many people on the planet, that to discuss there being a byproduct or that there's some opportunity for lessons learned, many of us are remarkably cautious. I include myself in that. Yet at the same time, if we can think about moving beyond and some of the skills and or practices that were by circumstance because of this pandemic that suddenly have a value that we had either understood or underappreciated or really didn't even recognize prior, like nobody really knows what the heck they're doing. There's a great value in that perspective because it means potentially there's some innovation. Potentially we can question status quo. You mentioned, you know, a particular lens, and whether it's a cisgender lens, a patriarchal lens, and there are lots of different lenses and both overt and covert biases that we have in perspectives, no matter who it is that we are. Sometimes it takes a shared experience like a pandemic to bring to the surface that, oh, was that what I was doing, right? One of the notes that I made while I was listening to you earlier was a thought about how we had politicians globally speaking for a very brief amount of time about new normal and about how there's this desirable new normal. And then people realized, well, that suggests that there was an old normal that was desirable.
Wasn't necessarily so.
Which, absolutely, Nikki, you're right, was not necessarily so. And we had our leaders, both, you know, politicians and some faith-based community leaders as well, move away from that language in, you know, early 2020 because they realized, right, yes, I don't know what that normal was, let alone if we're comparing it to a new one now. And then there was one other piece that I thought was important to emphasize in your comments. You know, being in the creative industries that you are, certainly I've had at arm's length the privilege of working with many different people who are either in front of the camera or behind the camera or holding the camera or in and around all of the great thinking that happens for all the visuals and all the content that we have available to us. It's a flexible, highly volatile, hyper-changing industry at the best of times. At the best of times, people have job insecurity, people have contractual work, people have whimsical decisions made that perhaps made sense between the artist's ears, but nowhere else. People have a unionized role that is used sparingly. There's multiple layers of decision making. There's invisible producers. Where are those people?
What are they? What do they do?
What do they do again? And yet they all come together. So I thought it was interesting, your comments about becoming even more flexible when yours is an industry that I think has historically been performing, gymnastics in comparison to some other industries. Tell me more about that flexibility. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. I remember thinking, I was in Los Angeles when I was filming a sizzle reel,
Mm-hmm.
and we shot it on March the 6th. And and went into lockdown the next day and thought that it was going to be for a few days, a few weeks.
Right.
And then it dragged on and on and on and on. And I found myself in a place where I've been many times in my life and in my career. It's like, well, I can't direct, I can't work, I can't do much of anything. I was in an apartment building that it's all young people in Los Angeles and Hollywood, and no one was wearing masks. And I was feeling very vulnerable. And so I was literally having to have food delivered I'm an extrovert, but I'm also an introvert as a writer. So I said, what I always say to myself, and my whole life has been, well, I know what I cannot do, but what can I do? And I said, well, I can write.
Mm.
I've been trying to find some time to write. So now's my opportunity. And I pivoted, and that's what we do. And it was interesting. I was in another mentoring group in Los Angeles with mostly younger people, and several of them were young moms. And they had a really, really, really hard time pivoting because they'd never had to do that pivot before. And they were stuck at home with their little kids, and not all of them, but they kind of went catatonic. And I remember sitting in those Zooms and going, and I was like a bouncing ball. I was like, and I finished this, and I got this done, and I got this episode written, and I got this treatment done. I was excited.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was excited. And they were just like catatonic. They couldn't function.
Yeah.
As time went by, they pulled it together and they figured out.
Right.
And I think that speaks to someone who's lived long enough to have gone through all the ups and downs in a career and had dry periods and have periods where things are happening. And I learned that we don't know how long this is going to be. It doesn't matter. I still have to function. I still have to make things. And making stuff became my theme of the day, whether it was making bread or making a recipe or, making something. And because I'm a creator. So it was like, okay, I can't create that way, but I have to create this way because this is keeping my soul alive. Otherwise I'm going to die here.
Fair enough. And that flexibility there, and pivot was a big deal. I have a parallel experience, which I have to say I've been cautious in sharing about the start of COVID, in that I had a preemptive amount of success and time working remotely. So the teaching that I do with a few universities or with my clients.
Wow, lucky.
A couple of years before, I had already had a setup. It's just that nobody wanted to talk to me about virtual learning. So unlike some of my colleagues, especially at universities, I had the tools to pivot and some comfort. I'm not necessarily technically super savvy, but I can slowly make my way there. And by contrast, I have at least 2 or 3 of my colleagues on the teaching side of things outside of the corporate world who are still resistant to any online platforms, which is amazing. Talk about a catatonic response to that. And those are individuals who I share some tenure on the surface of the planet. They're not, young folks. They've been around for a few of, the cycles and ups and downs. And even that was not enough of a impetus for them to try to pivot or to see that, well, maybe there is some skills that haven't had a chance to come to the forefront that will probably bring me forward. And if I don't know how to create in an alternative way, what happens, right? I don't know the answer to that, but there's a lot to be said for having that self-awareness around where it is that you can be responsive. And as I said, yours is an industry that asks for flexibility at the best of times. So,
and collaboration. I mean, we're not painting in a studio. We're not. Yes, I was writing. I found my writing rhythm. I never thought of myself as a writer because I thought writers have to sit at a desk all day, and I'm a dancer. I can't sit for long. You'll see me. I'll start
moving around. Sure.
Yeah. There's a Yiddish word called spilkas. It means ants in your pants. It's like that was from day one. I've just always been that way. So I learned two things. One about myself as a writer. One, and I learned it in Spain because I went on a writing retreat, and I found that I could write for 5 hours every day with getting up and dancing around and getting up and doing laundry and getting up and I had to keep myself physically moving. And then after 5 hours, I would hit a wall. I couldn't write anymore. And I had to go out and be with people because the extrovert in me needed to regenerate by being with other people. The introvert needed all that time alone. So it was like, I guess I am a writer. This is just how it works. So when I was in lockdown, I was like, okay, well, you can't go out and have dinner with people, but what you can do is every hour close the computer and get up and dance.
Right.
So I would put music on, and that's what I did. And in fact, I had very severe osteoporosis before COVID. And 2 years later, when I finally got to go back to the Women's College Hospital here, I didn't have osteoporosis anymore. I had cured myself. And they said, what? Because they'd been threatening me with the medications that I didn't want to take. And they said, what did you do? And I said, I've been dancing every hour for about 10 minutes every day. And they're like, weight-bearing exercise. Okay. And I said, I'm also, by that time I was taking walks outside. I'm doing my other exercise, but the additional thing factor was dancing. So I went, okay, so this is who I am. And this is how I am as a writer, as a creator. And now I make the world satisfying me. My world has to now work. I don't have to fit myself into something that isn't me now. So that was another very positive thing to come out of the pandemic for me.
COVID era, right?
Plus Zoom. I was like, I don't remember when Zoom happened, but I know that before that we had Messenger and we had
WebEx was around for a long time.
We had
Skype, perhaps?
Skype, which was always very problematic. For me, Zoom opened up a whole new world and continues to. And because I work internationally, it just made so many things so much easier. And also a lot of the organizations that I belong to, it opened them up as well, because it wasn't just Toronto based. It wasn't just Los Angeles based. Now we're having people zooming in from Europe and zooming in from South America and Africa and the Caribbean. I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Nikki, I agree with you. And, I think.
And look what we're doing today.
Exactly. And I don't even know, where are you? Where are you today?
I'm in Toronto today, and so are you. But we can do
There you go. It just happens. So part of the byproduct that I've been white knuckling my hold on during this COVID era is many people seeing that it isn't that big of a world. And at the same time, it's a remarkably diverse space. And Zoom, for a lot of organizations, has opened up some parameters and opened up at the same time some competition that, guess what? Means all of us need to bring our A game in some of those instances. I can tell you, before we go to our next question, it was during COVID that as a boutique company, as a small service provider myself, I have now a very well-established relationship with an organization whose headquarters are in Malmö, Sweden. And have had a fantastic time working with their staff who are dispersed over the entire surface of the planet, excluding North America. And that would have never come to pass in 2019. It just would not have happened. And I'm just delighted at that relationship and how it has been really facilitated out of necessity because of this pandemic, but has been fruitful for both me and for all of those folks that I've had the privilege of working with. So I hear you. I hear you.
I love it.
The next question that you selected, I have to admit, is one that asks for some serious thinking from guests. So I'm not surprised that you chose it at all, Nikki. And it reads, how have you seen or experienced empathy in your career? And it's already a word that you've mentioned in some of our conversations. So what are your thoughts about empathy?
Oh, gosh, this is such an interesting topic. As we've discussed, I work in the creative industry, and creators have to be vulnerable in order to receive whatever it is that they're taking in order to process and then put it out. But we're also, my world is also collaborative. As I said, we're not painting.
Right.
Sometimes we're writing, but even when we're writing, if I'm writing a screenplay, it's still going to go through several eyes on it and changes down the way. So learning to live with empathy and firmness and holding a vision and having standards of excellence and trying to combine all of that has been so interesting. And I have to say that I was a child performer, and I'll never forget this. It changed my life. I was 10 years old, and it was an opera. I was in Benjamin Britten's Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was playing a fog fairy. And the director's name was Harry Horner, and his huge cast with opera stars, out the wazoo. This was in Vancouver, and I was just one of many kids. And I think I got a stomach ache one day, and I wasn't feeling well. Now, my training as a dancer, you never complain. You never, you just suck it up. You just deliver. Somehow he must have come into the dressing room and asked me, like I must not have looked I don't remember how he knew that I had a stomach ache. But Harry Horner left the theater, big theater in Vancouver, and went down the street and brought me back an apple.
Really?
Yeah, because he decided that was going to help me feel better. And I don't remember if it did or it didn't. What made me feel better was the shock that this huge director, New York director, would go down the street to get an apple for this little kid in his cast who was having a stomach ache. And as I grew up in my life and in my career, and one of the things we learned is that we as a company, as a team of performers, we're only as strong as our weakest link.
Right.
And so that can be the little kid who's flying across the stage without her glasses and bumping into things. I think he had a soft spot for me after I had some real serious issues on stage, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyway, he knew that, and he was we're all teachers in a way, and so he taught me something that has affected me for the rest of my life. I don't know if he would even never remember it because it was just something he would just do automatically. But the shock is what he taught me. The shock, it wasn't, the stomach ache, I don't remember what happened, but I was just so moved and aware of the magnitude of this. And that has infused my work and it doesn't mean I'm not demanding as a leader, as a collaborator, we can't be lazy. We work in a very high octane world.
Right. Yes, of course.
But it's just sort of there with me. And that's thanks to Harry Horner.
That's a great story, Nikki. And what it brings to mind for me, especially you're reminding me of a team being as strong, or a production or a set, or, a unit being as strong as the weakest link. The display of empathy, people will often, unfortunately, see that empathy is an act of charity, or that empathy is somehow perhaps an act of selflessness, or that it had some sort of almost divine determination, to be frank with you, when in reality, it is a small act often of empathy that at the surface we can see benefits the greater good, if I may. So assisting you as the 10-year-old dancer performer, as a member of the cast, while absolutely it was a fantastic choice by Harry Horner, I can also say helped him in how he still had, hopefully, an intact cast for the show to go on.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a huge cast. There had to have been 40 people there. I mean,
oh, wow.
Most people wouldn't have noticed that this little kid had a stomach ache. Yeah. He did. He could see it. So, yes.
That's a big deal. And I love that you've kept that. There's something to be said about some gestures having outsized impact in our lives, isn't there? There's
absolutely. And it's happened to me many times in my life. And I'm always moved and surprised and thankful and grateful. And then also it's like, oh yeah, that's humanity.
Right. It's delightful to have those examples and those reminders, right? That's a good way of looking at it. I want to jump to one of the other questions that you selected from our questionnaire. And it's one of my absolute favorites that I think you and I have sort of talked around, but I'm going to ask us to have a bit of more of a focus. And it's, what does success leading others look like to you? So you have had so many different roles and have so many perspectives in terms of your work. In terms of leading others, what is it that you go to within that creative industry? Well, ideally, have them focus towards some sort of movement or goal or endpoint. How do you do it, Nikki?
Well, my focus is always what's on the screen, what's on the stage, what's on the screen. What are we doing here? Why are we doing it? So I'm always looking at making the best possible project I and we can. So the we word is incredibly important in the work that I do. As a leader, I am dealing, as I said, with creatives.
Right.
And there's not a lot of management courses for leading creatives other than the School of Hard Knocks.
Right. Or a lot of analogies such as pushing water up a hill or herding cats or other poorly visually oriented metaphors. Yes.
Because we don't want to squash, not just with creatives, because I believe all people are creatives. I really do, no matter what you're doing. And you'd never want to squash that. And I was raised with many examples where that was squashed, and not by Harry Horner, but by many, many leaders, the role model, especially in the dance world, of we're going to break you down and then build you up in our own image. And I was just so bloody minded constantly. I was always at loggerheads.
That we word is a very powerful 2-letter pronoun that I've actually just today spent several hours teaching around that 2-letter pronoun and the importance of defining who exactly is that we and how it is that we can be on potentially the same side of what I was teaching earlier, the it. And perhaps if I reach over to some of your comments, it's how is it that we can be on the same side of what's on the screen? Or how is it that we can figure out what are we doing here?
Yeah, what are we doing here? And to be creators, we have to be open to what the heck are we doing here? Because that's where the sparks fly creatively and non-creatively if we don't manage it well. You mentioned something earlier about what do those producers do? Like, what is that? What are those invisible people? Behind the camera, we're all invisible. So most people watch television or a movie and they see what's on the screen. And that's the intention, is watch the screen and have this beautiful, wonderful, whatever experience.
Yeah.
But whether you're a crew of 4 or 40 or 500 or 1,000, every single human touches that screen and affects that screen and what's on that screen. And basically that goes right back to Harry Horner and the apples for the kid with the stomach ache, because we have to, as a leader, I in my job, I have to provide an environment where people are safe and secure to express themselves, express their creativity, reach up and higher, make mistakes if necessary, without taking the whole ship down. Right. So it's a constant balance. And there's the balance of 1 foot in art and 1 foot in business, because everyone's got an idea and there's everybody, we're all making the same movie and every person that's on it would have a different way of making it. So as a leader, my job is to listen and to take advice and or not take advice, but to say to someone, best idea wins on set, but there's a time and a place for it. So if I'm in the middle of struggling and I'm on a deadline and the sun's going down or the rain is going to happen or whatever, please don't all shout your ideas at me. Take me aside, give me the idea. I'll either take it or not, but I'm always interested in what you have to say, you being everybody on this set. Yeah. And that goes from the PA, it's just going managing up, managing down. That's everybody, because in my mind, best idea is what's going to win to put on that screen, whether it's mine or anybody else's. And so, and I'm surrounded by creative people. So why wouldn't I listen to their ideas? They've been hired for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
For a reason.
Nikki, I'm reminded, I've had several conversations with guests on this podcast who have reminded me and who I feel great validation with about the significance of each person, whether it is a crew, a team, whether it's a unit, whether it is a interdisciplinary team that comes together in response to a crisis, whether it's a static group that has been together for the longest time, that the value, yes, absolutely, that the value that each person brings, that if that individual is afforded the space to recognize the value. So if I'm a PA, if I'm a production assistant or even a personal assistant, I know I am not the highest paid person on the set, right? And everyone else might know that as well. However, if there is a space afforded to me to have a voice, I need to recognize that there is no one else who brings that perspective that I bring. And tying back to one of your original comments about asking people during this COVID era, how's your family or how's your circumstance? It's a whole person there who is at the table, virtual or literal or on set or on the team. And I really think that person having the space to believe in their own value is the first piece. And then to echo your comments right now about the voice of we and the choice of that pronoun in how it is you lead, and that is in the solicitation of advice that, can come from that person who has their fingernails, in the thick of things, or someone who's never been engaged with a task before. I had one podcast guest recently remind me that it might be the door greeter at a retail environment who has a lot to say about customer service versus that customer service manager.
Absolutely.
And I agree with you absolutely as well, that there's a lot there. And if we perhaps don't ask that greeter might not have the validation that they are part of a bigger unit.
Also validating that they're the ambassador, they're the front line for that company. And I always used to say that we don't have receptionists anymore, but I always used to say the receptionists are the frontline ambassadors. So make sure they are functioning well and happy and giving your expression to the world, because that's when someone calls this company, that's who they. I mean, one of the things that I'm sad about in our world, not only of Zoom, but also just of mechanization, generally speaking, is that we are missing up those opportunities for the conversation around the water cooler of how's your family? What's going on? I worked in Montreal for a couple of years on several shows, and the company I worked for used to stop work every day at lunchtime in the office, and we would all go. We would bring our lunch. One of the employees of the company would make a big salad, and we would all go down, sit around a big table, and eat lunch together.
How lovely!
That was just what we did, and we didn't talk about business. We didn't talk about the shows. We just talked about families, and that was mandated. That's what happened every day, and so that was an incident where I went, "Oh, this is possible." We never did that in Toronto or Vancouver. We did it in Montreal. It's just valued, right? So I do miss that. This is the beauty of Zoom. We can do this, but I also would like to just give you a big hug one time. It's like, I'd like to, all of that. I can't wait to hopefully whatever happens tomorrow and the next day and the next day with COVID, that we can have the human exchange that we crave as human beings. We need it. We need it.
Absolutely. And that new normal, and if anything, has been so qualified and disqualified that there are some aspects of what we had taken for granted previously, those serendipitous conversations, the bumping into somebody, or even the opportunity to share an informal meal or a cup of coffee. We've suddenly reassessed the value, the placement, and some of the sanctity that we had taken for granted before. So you're absolutely right. We haven't figured that part out yet at all.
We're getting there. We're getting there. I think we're, just as we get used to it, though, it changes again. So again, pivot is all I can say.
It does. Well, I'm sincerely hoping that you and I can pivot and at some point actually share a space on a patio and perhaps a beverage of some sort, Nikki. Yes. I certainly am indebted to you for your time and all the great information and thoughts that you've shared over this last few minutes during this podcast. So thank you again. And I really do look forward to connecting with you and having that patio beverage sometime soon. All right?
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. I really, I always enjoy hanging out with you, whatever mode works. So, and I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.